Thank you, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here today and talk on a subject which, as Mike says, is a passion perhaps born out of frustration. I'm sure many of you here today have read or heard the qualities of attributable to a marine surveyor, which were contained in the Journal of the American National Association of Marine Surveyors in 1985, which started as follows. General, in order to satisfy Admiralty lawyers, a marine surveyor should be a qualified officer and a young man with many years of experience in all phases of marine activity, both ashore and at sea. And goes on, perhaps with tongue-in-cheek, to list the multitudinous qualities of marine activity, both ashore and afloat, which a marine surveyor must encompass. I'm not going to list them here, but just to set the scene somewhat, I've got some photographs which were taken over the years, which we've involved in, and which reflect the breadth of experience which a marine surveyor and the training scope which we're looking to must accommodate. I'm not going to talk to these, but they talk for themselves. This paper reflects the experience of a medium-sized marine survey company engaged in a broad variety of surveys, which we've just shown there, and indeed in consultancy work and loss prevention work involving ship and support craft casualties, their cargoes and personnel, and loss prevention exercises, executed on behalf of lawyers, on behalf of P&I clubs, and on behalf of ship owners operating in the United Kingdom, and seeks to identify the problems associated with the current recruitment of suitable personnel against a background of diminishing resource and economic competition, and develops a vision of the elements necessary to source and train the next generation of marine surveyors. While the paper is UK orientated and specific to big ship surveys, nonetheless, many of the aspects of this paper reflect the problems which I'm sure are common to the rest of the industry, the profession, all branches of marine surveying. Traditionally, and in general terms, marine surveyors in our particular bracket have been recruited from the ranks of qualified mariners, master mariners and marine engineers, officers seeking to develop their careers in an interesting shoreside employment to which they relate and have some prior knowledge, or just seeking a job away from the sea. Why master mariners or qualified marine engineers? While there are many highly competent marine surveyors who have come into the profession from a non-marine background, insurance, stevedoring and naval architecture, in my view, the professional mariner brings to the party unique credibility with the people we're dealing with. Credibility and acceptance by the masters and chief engineers with whom we're dealing, particularly bearing in mind that these chaps are usually confronted under distressed circumstances, and to which the qualified mariner can bring an empathy for the problems which might not be forthcoming from a non-marine background. Credibility with the P&I clubs. Thus far, I found the P&I clubs like to talk to a qualified mariner when they're talking about these things. Breadth of maritime experience, which I'd have to add, probably reflects having been through many mistakes and survived. In particular, a can-do approach to the job in hand, inherent to the maritime background, which gets results. And perception based upon experience. 3 years ago, I attended a joint survey involving 2 other surveyors. The aggregate age of the assembled company was 210 years. One surveyor, the boy, was only in his 60s. A lot of professional experience to hand, but a very sad reflection upon the industry, the profession as it stands. In my view, a purely maritime background does not create an instant marine surveyor, and on occasions the professional status of the marine surveyor has been denigrated by individual master mariners or marine engineers coming ashore and setting themselves up as one-man bands without the necessary underpinning base knowledge. In my own case, I came into the marine surveying business after 40 years in the merchant marine business, which had included general cargo, reefer tanker, offshore, and Pacific Island trading ships, including command on a fairly broad front. Before coming ashore into shore employment, which included ship and shipping company management, service with manufacturing companies, with logistic base management. I was Director of Operations of the Lighthouse Service at the time and Chairman of Investigative Inquiries into over 70 Scottish fishing vessel incidents. Did this fit me for service as a marine surveyor? I was questioned by the chap I was buying the company from, or proposing to buy the company from, who told me that it would take 7 years to make a marine surveyor out of me, and I'd almost certainly be dead in the meantime. An outstanding piece of corporate marketing, and luckily one which I chose not to take too much notice of. However, in the intervening years that I've been a marine surveyor, I have, with a huge amount of generous assistance from other professional surveyors, and a little bit of help from Google, wonderful thing, when a P&I club comes on to you and says, we've got a cargo bongo fruit, you know all about it, it's suffering from temperature abuse, please go and do something about it. Google for bongo fruit will probably give you 100 recipes on how to cook it, but it won't give you too much information about how it carries. The economics of recruitment are a serious consideration and are tied, in my opinion, to the professional perception of the marine surveyor in the marketplace. On my desk, I have papers associated with the liquidation of a well-known name in marine surveying entities. I was shocked and indeed envious to find that the senior practicing liquidator is charged out at £450 an hour, middle rankers at £230, £280 an hour, and junior staff at £120 to £185 an hour. If, as a respected surveying entity, we charged out at even the junior rate, we'd be out of business. I accept there are very limited numbers of marine surveyors who can charge out at a significantly higher rate. These entities employ highly qualified specialists and are not often very effective, and who these chaps create a very large overhead which must be serviced. But the general rate of remuneration chargeable, reflecting in turn what can be paid to surveyors, is a source of real concern when compared with other fee-charging professions, lawyers, accountants, architects, quantity surveyors, etc. In my view, the marine surveying profession must work to address this imbalance as a prerequisite of recruiting the right sort of personnel for the future. And the only way it will address such will be an overall elevation of professional standards within the marine surveying industry, which justify higher charge-out rates. This will not happen overnight, and in the meantime, recruitment problems bug us. Before considering the future, it is worth, in my view, considering the fundamental qualities attaching to a competent marine surveyor. In my view, these include an ability to expeditiously write concise, clear, court-compatible reports in the English language. I'm sure many of you will agree with me, this is not something which our profession is particularly good at in many cases. Experience-based qualifications, such as a Master Mariner, Chief Engineer certification of competency. A perceptive, inquiring mind which goes way beyond the standard aspect, nature, and extent cachet of the marine surveying business. In my view, a marine surveyor should actively seek to advise on loss prevention possibilities arising from his work. A naturally courteous approach at all levels, often very difficult, and something which many chaps can't achieve. A marine surveyor has to, at any one stage, be in a position to communicate at top level, at managing director level or whatever, and with the docker down the hold. And the latter is often more amusing than the former, but there we go. And finally, a passion for professional standards, manifested inter alia by membership of an appropriate professional body or professional bodies. Additionally, the following abilities are useful attributes. An ability to take and caption meaningful photographs. I was delighted to see the new publication by the Institute on photographs. It may seem a very simple thing, but how many times do I get reams and reams of photographs uncaptioned? And the thing is, well, you know what they mean. I may know what they mean. The guy who we're delivering it to certainly won't know what they mean. And it's terribly important that those photographs, if they're to be meaningful, and they should be meaningful, are suitably captioned and suitably produced. A dozen decently posed photographs and suitably captioned are worth a lot more than a multitude of indefinite photographs. An ability to effect simple, clear sketches and understand technical drawings, terribly important. And computer literacy, to include CAD, is most important. I would have to say against myself, as far as photographs are concerned, an added thing is safety. I find the most dangerous job I do is taking photographs, because I get so carried away with taking photographs, I step back, and a couple of times there has been a 60-foot drop behind me, inviting me to take another one. Against this background of drying up resources, where do we find new surveyors? In my view, the future would seem to lie, at least in part, in a structured marine surveyor apprenticeship scheme. Such a scheme would draw upon either school leavers, leaving school with a minimum qualification in English language, mathematics and physics, who would serve a full 4-year apprenticeship. I recently discussed this possibility with my son-in-law, who is headmaster of a very high-achieving British public school, who concentrates their endeavours in terms of getting children into Oxford and Cambridge. I caught him when I was in a 4.6 out in my gaff cutter with me driving, which it does tend to concentrate the mind of anyone, particularly an academic. And he said, although he obviously is looking to get people into university, the apprenticeship scheme has to go forward as being a very important part of our educational process and a much neglected one. The other alternative is graduates with an appropriate maritime studies first degree with watchkeeping certificate, and who would serve a 2-year student apprenticeship rather than the 4-year apprenticeship. George here, my colleague, I asked to come with me, not just to prop me up, but to give a little bit of his background, because he has come effectively through that route, albeit not an apprenticeship. Key elements of an apprenticeship scheme, in my view, would include accreditation by an appropriate professional body. The International Institute of Marine Surveyors comes to mind. A structured training program founded upon an appropriate open learning course with modules selected to suit the needs of the sponsoring company and with prospects for academic advancement. On-site training under the tutelage of an experienced surveyor, specific deployment and internships reflecting the sponsor's practice, including, by way of example, P&I club and shipping line internments. The P&I clubs I've spoken to have welcomed the thought of a training program for future surveyors. They would, of course, because it is in their interest. They don't have to pay for it. But they have indicated to me that they'd be more than happy to have interns in from an accredited apprenticeship scheme, whereby they can learn how the P&I clubs work, learn how the shipping lines work. Insofar that we do a lot of refrigerated warehouse work, refrigerated cargo work, it would be useful to get refrigerated warehouse quality control experience and reefer container courses. Rigging yard deployment. We do a lot of flat rack and break bulk work, which involves the surveyor taking charge of rigging gangs. And in the event that you haven't got a mariner who is experienced in this, then certainly working for 3 months in a rigging yard would be extremely useful, and I know from our own discussions within town that this would be okay. The rudiments of accountancy and business management. Right, gone too far. As far as I'm concerned, it may be said that why does an apprentice need to know the rudiments of accountancy and business administration? I think it's critical that from the outset, trainees should understand that we're in business, not to marine survey, but to make business. The marine surveying is the means of earning a living, but they must understand accountancy. A survey is not a survey until such time as the invoice has come in. And all too frequently, firms of our nature have gone to the wall because of a lack of attention to that. Quality management systems. the taking of evidence, the giving of evidence, report writing, safety training, vitally important, computer literacy to include CAD, and crucial to a non-degree course apprentice who has not gone through the maritime training with a 6 months, 12 months at sea, would be 6 months experience at sea as a cadet. Now, I see that as vitally important to at least get the feel of the operation. Just how we would be managed to fit that in, I have yet to establish. It is quite possible that Trinity House, under the aegis of their training schemes, might fit it in. They fit in training schemes for big yachts people. Why shouldn't they fit in training schemes for surveyors, and indeed sponsor them perhaps? Factors which would impact upon a successful scheme: career awareness at secondary schools and university level. In my opinion, and my soundings around, very few career masters at schools or indeed universities know anything about marine surveying, and that is a function that we have got to address. Acceptance by the powers that be that marine surveying, in the sense that we are talking about, exists as a profession, acceptable for inclusion within government sponsorship. I've talked to the government, and the result has been fascinating. They don't know what a marine apprentice is, and it doesn't appear on a list. Oh yes, there's a quantity surveyor. Does that fit in? No, it doesn't actually. We have marine deckhands. Does that fit in? No, it doesn't actually. We're talking about marine surveying, a profession. So there's a big job to be done in terms of getting people to understand what's required there. The role of the IIMS as an accreditation body. Any apprenticeship scheme would have to be accredited to get any government recognition and indeed sponsorship. And the appropriate body for doing this would undoubtedly be, in my opinion, the IIMS. And the ongoing career prospects and academic advancement of potential apprentices. There will inevitably be high costs associated with this. The availability of state funding under an apprenticeship scheme, for such the scheme would need to be accredited, as we've discussed, at government level, accepted at government level on the basis of accreditation. The cost of employing an apprentice over a period of time in non-productive employment, though progressive involvement at the lower end of the surveying spectrum under supervision would hopefully offset some of these costs. The inevitable distraction to productive personnel of monitoring apprentices. Though I'd have to say I think there's a flip side to this insofar that there's always something that the mentoring person can learn from the apprentice. The cost of equipment, personal protective equipment, the cost of training providers. Now, the government will immediately say training providers. Who are the training providers? And that is something which has got to have to be resolved. I do not want the thought of a marine apprenticeship marine surveying apprenticeship going down the route of becoming a college course. There may be college intervention, but in my view, many of the problems currently being faced by the Merchant Navy and the officers within it and the professionalism there has arisen from the whole thing being driven by the colleges rather than experience. So they will certainly ask for training providers. Who are they to be? And there will certainly be training providers leap out of the woodwork offering their services. It needs to be controlled. The goodwill of partnerships, such as the P&I clubs, that will have to be developed, and it's something which individual companies can do, but it's also something that the IIMS can do. and the ever-present prospect that once you've trained a guy to a high standard and equipped him for a future, that other surveying entities who have done nothing in the terms of training will come out of the woodwork, offer him a good salary, and snatch him or her up. I see a very specific role for the IIMS, which I've touched on to some measure, but the promotion of the very meaning of marine surveyor as a professional career opening within education, government, and industry circles. I see that as vital. It's not there at the moment. The establishment of a training standard based upon existing or to be developed schemes. There are a number of open learning schemes, some of them good, some of them bad. I'd like to think that ours is pretty good, but it may well be, against the background of an apprenticeship, it needs to be developed. Liaison with government, education, professional establishments to secure accreditation status. Not something the individual sponsoring company can do, but it is possible, or should be the role of the IIMS. Stemming from accreditation, tapping into nationally available training funding. Now, the government has funding, which it pours into apprenticeship schemes around the place. They tend to pour it into the training providers, so therein may be a problem, unless, of course, the IIMS is the training provider. It may well, again, coming back to Trinity House, be that Trinity House could provide, under the aegis of their charitable training programs, sponsorship for it. If it's sold to them properly, it is, after all, a vital function of the marine world, and involving practical people, they may well do it. Securing recognition of equivalent standards, NVQ levels, BTECs, whatever, and I've touched upon the role of training providers, if anything. Now, George Brown has come through a similar path to the apprenticeship scheme, taking the university route. And I'd like him to perhaps just give a few words on his experience, not as an apprentice, but on very similar line, if you would, George.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so just to give you a quick overview of my experience. So I did, prior to going to university, I did do some pre-uni work experience with Stephen Clark, and as Peter points out, because it's poorly promoted in education, I wasn't aware of marine much part of the industry before I met Peter. But anyway, so I did my work experience and then went to do a merchant shipping degree at Plymouth University, and that was integrated with sea time and an officer's watch ticket as well. So I did that, but then because of my previous work experience, I was interested in pursuing a career in the marine surveying industry instead of going to sea, as you would traditionally do. So I did that and went to Australia and worked there for 3 years for a fairly large marine surveying company based in Fremantle. And yeah, very interesting, and then have recently returned back to the UK to rejoin Stephen Clark. So in my opinion, my university experience and seagoing experience did help me kind of provide a stepping stone to get into the marine surveying industry, but by no means did it make me a fully qualified marine surveyor, but it did allow me to start off and get into the niche of marine surveying. And because of that, I do feel that it's very important to be monitored by a very experienced marine surveyor to maintain continuous professional development. So that's my general experience, really.
What was it worth it? You're still alive. So.
Peter, another 5 minutes, please.
Okay, well, I'm wrapping up now. We've been through the various possibilities which I see as being the future in terms of an apprenticeship, a student apprenticeship in the marine surveying role. The prospect of inducing a professional apprenticeship scheme for potential marine surveyors might not only fill a need in terms of personnel for the future and provide a career opportunity for young people, but would also provide a unique opportunity for upgrading professionalism in the marine surveying market. Professionalism which is sadly lacking in some quarters. There is, in my opinion, more to marine surveying than giving an office clerk a fancy emblazoned jacket and calling him or her a marine surveyor. And I make this comment against the background where, in my opinion, in the UK market, in our sector of the UK market at this moment in time, there are worrying levels of development where big names in so-called marine surveying are buying market share by cut price rates, fixed price surveys at a low level, executed by staff brought in, contracted in from who with no background experience whatsoever. And that, to gain market share, is doing a grave injustice to the marine surveying profession. So I hope that by training our own people for the future, we can bridge the gap which exists in many places and create some really professional marine surveyors for the future. So, will we be ready? We need to move. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.